spent both nights with Colonel Edson up there.
Wow.
And we found out, just by luck, we found out.
That he lived down there?
So he asked us to come down, and so we went down.
When was that?
Well, we first met him in, when the New York State Museum put on a presentation on the 50th anniversary of landing in Guadalcanal in August of '92.
Uh-huh.
And they called all the Marines that were in the area that they knew. So we first met him down there when he made his presentation, talking about that he was an artillery observer, but he didn't say anything about being a Bloody Ridge. So Bob and I asked him after the presentation if he knew who the forward observer was that night, and he said, "Yeah, I was."
No kidding.
It was really strange.
Did you know he was a Raider?
No, he wasn't a Raider. He was from the artillery regiment, from the 11th Marines. But they were, you know, backing us up with the artillery. So
Small world, isn't it?
yeah, it was really funny how we met.
Well, I'm going to get Laura. This is Laura.
Okay.
This is her cameraman, Kaylee. And Laura's going to interview you. Kaylee's just going to operate the camera.
Okay.
I have to run down to the faculty meeting, but I'll be back.
All right.
Okay? Whenever you're ready, Kay.
Okay.
See you ready.
All right, I'll start with, today's Tuesday, December 20th, 2005. It's 3:45, and I'm Laura Heel interviewing Mr. West at the Hudson Falls High School. When and where were you born?
I lived in Fort Ann, but I was actually born in Glens Falls Hospital.
What was your date of birth?
October 29th, 1919.
Okay.
Which in those days, that was strange because most people were born right in the homes. But they had a problem, so I had to be born in the hospital, which was very rare for those days.
What type of education did you have before you entered the war?
Just high school.
You graduated from high school? Did you, Fort Ann High School?
Fort Ann High School.
Where were you when you heard about the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7th, 1941?
I'll never forget it. I was sitting in a barracks in Quantico, Virginia. I had the duty that weekend. And there were about 10 of us there listening to the Washington Redskins football game, which had just started. And maybe 5 minutes they'd been playing, because it started at 1 o'clock, and something like 1:05 they broke in with the announcement saying that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
What was your reaction to that?
Well, it's just, you know, you heard so much about all these meetings, but still you didn't expect something like that to happen. So I couldn't believe it, really, to tell you the truth.
So you entered this, what year did you enter the service then?
September 1940.
Which, were you drafted or enlisted?
No, I was enlisted.
Mm-hmm. Which branch did you enlist?
The draft didn't start until October of that year.
Oh.
In fact, the draft, they pulled the first number out of the fishbowl on my 21st birthday. In October, I was still in boot camp in Paris Island when they did that.
Which branch did you choose?
Pardon?
Which branch did you choose to enlist in?
Which branch did I want?
Choose to enlist in?
The Marine Corps.
Marine Corps. Where did you do training before you went over to the Pacific?
Paris Island, South Carolina. Same place they train today.
What was that like?
Boot camp. Kind of rough. It's a different experience, you know. Tough, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a completely different way of life.
How long did that last before you went over to the...
I think in those days it was 12 weeks.
When you finally entered the war, what battles were you involved in? What was your first battle that you fought?
We landed in Tulagi on August the 7th, 1942. In fact, our battalion made the very first amphibious landing of World War II in the Pacific. We landed an hour before the 1st Marine Division landed in Guadalcanal. we landed at 8 o'clock in the morning and they landed at 9. But we go, in history, we're listed as being making the first amphibious landing of World War II.
What'd you do after that? Like, what were your objectives or whatever?
I was in, at the time we landed there, I was in a demolition platoon. And our function was, when we weren't being used as a demolition platoon, we did patrolling for the battalion, and then at night we served as security for the colonel's command post.
How did you feel during your first experience? Was it like when you first began in combat, when you were first entering the war?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain, because you can't say you're scared then because there's too many things going on. You're probably more scared afterwards when you think about all the things that happen than you are right when it's happening. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a strange situation.
So after, how long were you on Tulagi for?
We landed on August the 7th, and we stayed there till August the 30th, so we're there a little over 3 weeks.
What'd you do?
Actually, what happened, when we landed, we were only supposed to be there 3 days. We weren't, it wasn't in the plans for us to even stay there. As soon as we captured Tulagi, we were supposed to go back to New Caledonia and train for another mission. But what happened after they had that huge naval battle on the second night, and all our ships left, we didn't have any way to leave there, so we had to stay.
So you just kind of waited after the...
Well, and then they were deciding things were getting a little tougher in Guadalcanal than they had anticipated, so they decided to use us. The fact that we were there, so they sent a couple of these old World War II, the APDs they call them. They were transports made from old 4-stack destroyers from the World War I days. They're the same ships that we had landed on Tulagi to begin with. And they sent them over, and we went over to Guadalcanal on them.
Then what'd you do at Guadalcanal?
Well, we were there about 8 days, and they decided, we made a raid on a place called Tasambogo, because the Japanese had been landing troops night after night. They'd send a few hundred down on destroyers, land them, and get out of there before daylight. So the general kind of wanted to know what was going on, so the only way to find out, we made a landing early in the morning of September the 8th and found out that, yes, there was a considerable force at Tasambogo, which had already left there. So the colonel came back, and the next morning he told the general that the situation, how many troops, he estimated there were 3,000 or 4,000 troops there. And that's when we went up in man disposition, which turned out to be where the Battle of Bloody Ridge was 3 days later.
What was that like, the Battle of Bloody Ridge?
Very intense, probably the decisive battle of the whole campaign. In fact, history will record that without the Raider Battalion, we probably would not have held Guadalcanal, no question about it. I'm not saying that because I was in the Raider Battalion, but anyone that studied Marine Corps history can attest to the fact that we saved the airfield that night, because without it, it would have been another battalion death march.
Where'd you go from there? What did you do after that?
In fact, I saw a thought in it. In the Battle of Bloody Ridge, just to give you an idea, 2 men in our battalion won the Congressional Medal of Honor And there were 13 Navy Crosses awarded to men in our battalion just for that one battle, which is unheard of. For example, in the whole war in Iraq, there's only been something like 4 or 5 Navy Crosses awarded in both wars in the Gulf War.
What did you do in that battle?
I was telling them, I started out, I was in a demolition platoon. We had 40 men, and we hadn't lost, I think we had one person got evacuated for sickness, so we had like 39 men. When we were ordered to take up those positions north of Henderson Field along the ridge on September the 10th, 2 days before the Battle of Bloody Ridge, Colonel Edson needed men in the rifle companies more than he needed a demolition platoon. So he split up the demolition platoon and sent us to all different rifle companies. So I wound up as in the machine gun section of B Company. And only because my old platoon leader in the demolition platoon had been made the company commander of B Company the day before. Because one captain got sick, and then the next day another one got sick.
What kind of, how sick? I mean, what was?
Oh, dengue fever, malaria. We had lost, by that time, we had lost quite a few to both, like I say, both dengue fever and malaria. They hadn't necessarily gotten evacuated from there. We got some of them back, but they were in sick bay, recovering. The regular company commander of B Company, Captain Wheeler, was one. He later came back.
Were you ever sick and had to be?
No, fortunately, I was very healthy.
Did you ever meet Edson?
Oh, yes. I had a strange occurrence with that. The first time I ever met Colonel Edson is I joined the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines in Quantico, Virginia on May 29th of 41. And at the time I joined, they were getting ready to make maneuvers up and down the East Coast. The 1st Battalion, 5th Marines in Edson was awarded the job of rewriting the amphibious landing manuals for the whole Marine Corps. So they sent these APDs, World War I destroyers, that they'd made what they call APDs out of it. I don't know what stands for amphibious something, I don't know. Anyway, they sent them right up the Potomac River to Quantico, and we loaded on there, and we left right from there. And that was something like, I don't know, June 20th, 21st, something like that. It was only 2 or 3 weeks after I joined. And we left and went down the river, and we went to what is now Camp Lejeune, which was under construction at that time. It was only a tent camp. But it's where Camp Lejeune is today. And we made landings for about 2 or 3 days. And strange as it seems, about the 3rd day I came back to the ship. Of all things, I come down with the mumps, which created a real panic. The doctor went up to see Colonel Edson, and he said, "We got to get him off the ship before he contaminates the whole, everybody that's on here." So they got permission to make a speed run, and this occurred about, I don't know, 8 or 9 o'clock at night. They made a speed run from off Onslow Beach, North Carolina, to Charleston Navy Yard, South Carolina. And I'll never forget it. We got there about midnight, and it was dark, and they couldn't go in there because they didn't have a pilot. There's a long breakwater at the harbor at Charleston, and you can't go in and out of there at night. So they sent an old whaleboat out there, threw a cargo net down over the side, and I went down over the side in this whaleboat. And as I did, I looked up, and Colonel Edson and the doctor were both there watching me leave it at midnight. So after I got out of I stayed in the hospital, I don't know, 7 or 8, 9 days, something like that. I don't remember exactly how many, but I got out of the hospital, and the policy was, and I think it's still the same today, if that happens, when you get out of the hospital, they just send you to the nearest, and I wound up getting transferred to the nearest, the old Marine barracks at Charleston Navy Yard. One of the oldest barracks, I guess, dated back to the Civil War days. And I didn't think I was going to stay there. I wasn't aware of the regulations, of course. So the sergeant, first sergeant said, "Oh no, you're here to stay. We're going to send back to Quantico and get all your equipment. You're here." About 2 or 3 days later, I went downtown one night, and I found out that the ships had come in for the weekend from Onslow Beach. So I said, "Ooh, I got to get out of here." So I went down to the ship, and I saw the adjutant and told him I wanted to, how's chances of getting back in the battalion? He said, "I don't know." He says, "I'll give you an appointment. Go see the colonel and tell him your story." So I did. I went in there and I lay around the line, boy. I said, "I love the 1st Battalion, 5th. I don't want to stay in this barracks. I want to get back in the outfit." So he says, "Well, go back to the barracks and I'll see what I can do." I went back, and within the hour, the first sergeant comes down, and I'll quote, to this day I'll never forget it. His face was as red as a Marine Corps flag. His words were, quote, "Who the hell do you know, Franklin Roosevelt?" He says, "Pack your bags, you're going back to the ship." He did an about face, and away he went. Boy, I'll tell you, he was not a happy camper. That was my first experience with Colonel Edson. And here I was, a lowly private, with a year in the Marine Corps. But he was a man of action, apparently. Boy, I don't know how he arranged it, but it didn't take long.
So after you were on Guadalcanal, what did you do from there?
After we left Guadalcanal, we went back to New Caledonia. We left Guadalcanal October the 13th, the night of another big naval battle. In fact, in history, the night the Boise got hit and almost sunk in this naval battle. And it wound up, we escorted the Boise back to New Caledonia.
What battle was that?
It was only the second naval battle they'd had. The first naval battle was the second night. We were, I think, August the 8th, Battle of Savo Island, when we lost the 4 cruisers.
And that's when the Navy took off? Didn't the Navy leave? You guys?
Yeah, they left after that the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked out there and there was nothing. Everything left. Yeah. But then the Japanese had been in there a few times bringing troops in, but they hadn't, we didn't have enough ships there to challenge them at all. So we finally had a few in there, and then so the second naval battle off of there actually occurred the night of the 13th that we left. They had brought in the new battleship Washington, the Boise, and 3 or 4 other cruisers, and put up a pretty good battle that night.
What ship were you? Do you remember the name of the ship you guys were on?
Yeah, we left on the old Macaulay that had brought in an army regiment, the first army troops to help out in Guadalcanal. came in on the same ship and we left on it after they unloaded the same day.
What was your most memorable experience from the war?
Probably the Battle of Bloody Ridge.
Is that 2 nights?
Yeah, 2 nights. Yeah.
Did you receive any medals during that?
I didn't, no.
No?
No.
Did you receive any medals during the whole war?
No.
No? So you were never wounded?
No?
Was there any experience that was really humorous that sticks to your mind from your whole war experience?
I think probably the strangest thing that happened to me was in the first battle of Matanicow River, I think in September, about a week or 10 days after Bloody Ridge, when we went out to Matanicow the first time. I was standing watching a machine gun, it was raining, and I heard a big thud, and I thought of Japanese, they used to tie themselves in trees. And I didn't know what it was. I heard this big thud. Really scared the heck out of me. And what it was a big iguana about 1 foot long, had fallen out of this tree. And he hit the ground and went scampered off. He probably was as scared as I was.
What was that battle like?
That got to be intense. They were on one side, we were on the other, but we were able to hold them off. They weren't able to cross the river that night. But it did get a little intense.
Did you lose a lot of men during that battle?
Not that night, and we went out there a second time, on October 9th and 10th, I think, about 3 or 4 days before we left the island. In the second battle of Matanicow, we lost quite a few guys that night.
Did you ever meet Admiral Goss?
Angus Goss?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was my platoon leader. I knew him very well. I was his platoon sergeant in New Georgia when he got killed. Yeah, I knew him very well.
What was he like?
Probably the greatest Marine NCO that I ever met in my life. He was a great, great guy. And fortunately, I don't know, he took a liking to me for some reason right when I first joined the 1st Battalion, 5th in Guanaco. And in the summer of '41, they came out with I was in the 81 mortars then. And they came out with a $6 a month pay for the 4 guys that were gunners. And I was the first one in the battalion to get that $6. Well, when you're making $21 a month, I mean, you make six more dollars, boy. That's a big raise. It's the same as getting promoted to PFC. But then later on, in New Georgia, when we were training to go to New Georgia in April '43, by that time, in the Raiders, to step back a little bit, in the Raiders, I went from private to platoon sergeant in 14 months in the Raiders.
What did you have to do to go up in rank like that?
Just a matter, a lot of it's being in the right place at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
But also a lot of luck in it. And you also, I worked hard at it too.
You have to be, you have to have some kind of leadership skill, right?
Yeah, I made March I made corporal in March right after I formed the Raiders. Then I made sergeant in November after we got back to New Caledonia after Guadalcanal. And then in April of '43, before we went to New Georgia, I made platoon sergeant. And in the demolition platoon, we had 3 sergeants. And I've always felt very fortunate. And we were all great friends. We'd all been in the 81 mortars together, the old 5th Marines. And Goss had a tough decision. He had to make one of the three of us platoon sergeant. And fortunately, he selected me. And I've always been, thankful for that.
How much older was he than you?
He had joined the Marine Corps in 1929. He was an old China Marine. He was probably about 33, 34 years old when he got killed. I don't know exactly. I knew at one time. I'm trying to think. I think he was born in 1909, which would have made him 10 years older than I was. Seemed like I remember. 1909, I think.
What was the fighting like in New Georgia? Was it much different?
New Georgia was a tough campaign physically, very tough. Tougher than Guadalcanal or Tulagi. Because we had landed on the opposite side of the island. And we had to go about 6 miles through the jungle, and I mean, it was tough. And all they had was one trail. We had to run the whole battalion single file all the way. Because they'd had natives out there with machetes just cutting a trail. And can you imagine marching 800 and something men in single file? It was, and it was also very scary because you didn't know at any time when you were going to get attacked. So militarily, it was a tough way to go.
Was it wet?
And fortunately, our first objective was a place called Anagai Inlet on the opposite side, and we reached there without. We only had one little skirmish on about the third day, I think, but nothing major. But physically, that was a tough. One day, I think Joe Alexander writes it in our book. In one day, we didn't even go a mile. One day, we went something like a half a mile, because what had happened, there was I forget the name of this creek. It was in the rainy season. And we had people from our battalion, one of our captains, Captain Boyd, took a reconnaissance party up there, actually scouted this area, but before the rainy season. So when we get to this stream where we were supposed to walk across, it was a raging river by the time of there. So we had to march a whole battalion across this log, single file, which literally took hours. Because people fell off the log, they had to fish them out of the river, and it was a little bit scary walking across there with all your equipment on your back. And in the demolition platoon, we were carrying an extra load because we had this little demolition pack strapped on the back of our pack with the TNT and things in it. Every man had a load of that. In addition, then we had things like Bangalore torpedoes. It's like a 2 or 3 inch tube packed with TNT. We had people carrying those. So New Georgia was a really physically demanding campaign.
So where'd you go after New Georgia?
We came back to New Caledonia, and I came home.
When you were in, like, Guadalcanal in New Georgia, did you ever come in contact with the civilians at all?
No, there weren't any civilians. They all took off of the hills, whatever was there, because they had escaped from the Japanese. They were all, there weren't any. The only thing that was in Guadalcanal other than the Japanese, they had some Korean workers building the airfield. And Bob and I were talking about it last weekend. He asked me the same question. We wondered whatever happened to those workers. What did we do with them? And I don't know whether we took them off the island or left them there. I don't know what happened to them. In fact, I had never thought about it until Bob Edson happened to raise that question when we were talking last weekend.
Did you know Bob when you were there?
Yeah, Bob was in the same platoon with me. He had joined, when he joined the Marine Corps and came in, well, what had happened? They were enlisting about 500 a day, which was an awful lot of people because Parris Island couldn't handle that many after the war started. So what had happened, Bob's platoon only went through with 3 weeks of training in Parris Island, and they sent him to Quantico to fire the rifle range. Because there was a big snag there, they were backing them up so much they just had to get them out of there because Parris Island was the only boot camp the Marine Corps had. And they just couldn't handle them, so they started sending a few hundred at a time to Quantico, like I said, to fire the rifle range part of it. And then when Edson formed the Raiders in February of '42, he needed about 300 guys in a hurry to fill up a battalion. So he and some of the officers went down there and got up and made a big speech to all these guys and wound up getting all kinds of volunteers. Got to 300 without any problem. And that's when Bob joined the 81 Mortar Platoon of the Raiders that I was in.
So wasn't he from Ohio?
He was originally from Ohio, yeah.
You were from where?
I was from right here. I was originally from Fort Ann.
So how did he wind up here? Just
He took the
coincidence?
job at ACC as athletic director. What had happened, Bob got selected for V12 program, which is an officer program where you go to college and then when you finish college, you make you second lieutenant in the Marine Corps and you have a certain obligation. Well, Bob was in there. He had started that in the beginning of '44 after we came back from overseas. He came back same time I did. We were in Camp Elliott. And so when the war ended, Bob was, I don't know, he'd only had a couple semesters when the war ended. And then they discharged him from the Marine Corps and he finished college. And he met Dr. Eisenhart, you remember they had taught at the same, I think, Denison College in Ohio. Bob had met Eisenhart, who was the president of, I think it was Denison. So a year after Eisenhart came to Glens Falls, he needed an athletic director, so he got in touch with Bob or vice versa. And so Bob put 29 years in as athletic director at ACC.
But it's kind of a coincidence that you both kind of wound up in the same geographic region.
Yeah, well, the funny thing was, after I retired from the Army in March of '62, that summer, Bob got transferred in and he came into Sears to buy his appliances. And he looked over there and he walked over and he says, I know you from somewhere. And I knew the face, but I mean, you're talking 20 years after. Because the last time I saw Bob was in 1943 in Camp Elliott. So it's like 19 years later. And then we got talking and Marine Corps, and the minute he said Marine Corps, then I remembered.
Sorry, Laura, I just wondered.
That's okay.
But Bob's squad leader was an old, he joined a guy named Erwin Combs. He still goes to our, still kicking, he still goes to our reunion. He was Bob's squad leader in the 81 Mortars. But like I say, we had 4 guns, so 4 squads. So I knew who he was, but I didn't know him that well.
During the war, how often did you write home?
If I was able to, I used to write about once a week if except when we were in combat, and I couldn't. In fact, my mother lived to be almost 102 years old, and you know, she had all the letters I ever sent her. I have them home. After she passed away, I have all the old letters I ever sent her.
Was there any point in the war where things got really tough and you just felt like going home and giving up and didn't know what else to do?
No, I liked the Marine Corps. That's why I stayed in. I liked the service.
Was that mostly how everyone else felt, or was it just you?
And when the war ended, I was a gunnery sergeant, which wasn't too bad. I made gunnery sergeant 4 years in the Marine Corps, which was good. And I came back and I looked around a little bit, and I decided that I was going to stay in.
Did you have any experiences with like lack of materials or supplies during the war, or was that mostly not you guys?
Lack of what?
Materials or supplies?
Lack of materials?
Yeah, supply, like, or food.
Well, we had a lot of problems. Yeah, New Georgia, we didn't have food for 36 hours one time. They had to parachute in K rations to us. Because the campaign lasted longer, much longer than they had anticipated. So we ran out of a lot of things.
What was your objective on New Georgia?
To take the north part of, up around Rice Anchorage, I forget the name of the area, but the Army had already taken the south end down where Monday Airfield was. And we were in the northern part, opposite Kolabengara Island, of which it was only about, I think, 3 miles across from where we were at Enegai Inlet. And it was sitting over there with 10,000 troops, but they didn't have any transportation. So fortunately, that saved us. Otherwise, we would have been in a pretty precarious situation.
How did Angus Goss die?
You know, for a long time they didn't know, but he got shot in the back of the head by a sniper, they figured. The very last battle that we were in, the last day we were in combat.
Where was that?
At a place called Bairoko Harbor, which was a very, very bad experience. Should have never taken place in the first place. Because we didn't have the troops to do it. Should have never been attempted.
Whose call was that?
The regimental commander of, the 4th Raider Battalion was up there with us on a regimental basis. And I'm trying to think of this colonel's name. I can't think of it right now. But anyway, our colonel was Sam Griffith, who had replaced Edson. He was the exec under Edson, and he took over when Edson got transferred. And the second time I went overseas, in January '45, I joined the 3rd Division in Guam as a replacement after Iwo Jima. We stayed there. In fact, I landed as a replacement on D-Day in Iwo Jima. February the 19th is the day we got to Guam, with 3 replacement battalions that were going to stay there until the division got back from Iwo. Well, when things got bad, 2 of the 3 wound up going to Iwo Jima before they got so short-handed. The one I was in was the only one that didn't go. When they came back from Iwo Jima, Sam Griffith received a spot promotion to Bird Colonel to take over the 21st Marines. And I guess you look over rosters, I suppose, when you reach that level. Anyway, the first outfit he came down to inspect was the 81 Mortar Platoon that I was a gunnery sergeant in the 81 Mortars in the 1st Battalion, 21st. And he walked right up there, you know, hey, you know. And it was really, we became quite close because, and there was another fellow named Paul Ward. I didn't know him in the Raiders, but he had the same job in the 2nd Battalion, 21st that I had. He was a gunnery sergeant from the Mortars. So Sam Griffiths used to invite us up on a weekend. And if we didn't go up there, he'd get on the phone and call for us to go up there. Because he loved the Raiders and he loved to talk about it. And in one of the discussions that we had up there, I'll never forget it, he admitted what a mistake it was to expect. We only had 2 rifle companies by that time. Manpower-wise, we were down to, we sent 2 rifle companies out there from the 1st Raider Battalion and 2 from the 4th Raider Battalion, and that's all.
Raji, please come to the main office.
Expecting to take that harbor, and no one knows how many, but they had defenses there. It was unbelievable. We spent a whole day there. We wound up in I think 1st Raiders, we had 20 killed that day, just in a little while, in a few hours. And I don't know how many wounded. And we hadn't even come close to the objective.
What was the job of the gunnery sergeant? Or what was,
It's the same as today. A gunnery sergeant, actually the 1st sergeant handles the administrative part of the company. And the gunnery sergeant handles all the other things like how much ammunition you have left, and rations, and everything concerning that company. He helps the captain out doing that portion of it. Where, like I say, the 1st sergeant does the administrative end of it.
mm-hmm.
The gunnery sergeant in a mortar platoon, for example, you do all the training in there. It's a little different situation. You're primarily concerned with training and, well, again, keeping track of your ammunition and things of that nature.
How did you feel towards the Japanese people as you were in the war? How did you feel towards the Japanese people during the war?
I never held it against, I mean, I figured, hey, they're doing their job just like we were. I mean, a lot of people did, but I never held it against them.
Is that how you feel today still? Or? Mm-hmm.
No, I've never, I don't hold it against them.
Did you see anyone that, and during the war, that had battle fatigue or was shell-shocked?
Yeah, we had a few guys that had battle fatigue, yeah. Navy called it combat fatigue, is a term that Marine Corps used.
What was that like? What did they?
Well, there's a lot of, you know, the funny thing is, I got evacuated from New Georgia, and what I had, our doctor had evaluated me as having, I think you pronounce it gastroenteritis. It's a stomach problem caused by not eating the right kind of food. And our doctor evacuated me, and I flew to Naval Hospital in Tulagi. Years later, really disturbed me. Years later, I looked at my records, and in there in Tulagi, the guy had changed it to combat fatigue. I couldn't believe it. But
Why do you do that?
I don't know. Well, they really didn't figure, they didn't find anything. After I had I stayed in a hospital for about a week and I was eating regular, then I felt fine.
So he probably just made an assumption, wrote it down.
Yeah, because there were a lot of guys in there that had combat fatigue, so he probably figured, well, that's the easiest diagnosis, so we'll just write down combat fatigue.
So where were you when you heard the war was over?
I was in Guam. In fact, I was in the 3rd Division in Guam, and we were within about 1 week of leaving to go to the Philippines to join the 10th Army to make the invasion in Honshu in southern Japan, if the war hadn't have ended.
So did it come as a surprise, or was it sort of anticipated? Or?
Yeah, it came as a very good surprise, knowing that knowing what your next objective is. The homeland of Japan didn't sound, and I only kind of found that out because Sam Griffith had kind of hinted at, you know, he didn't want to come right out naturally in his position. He couldn't come right out and say where we were going to go. But I found out that the 1st Battalion, 21st that I was in was going to be the assault battalion on the southern tip of Honshu Island in a place called Kagoshima. And after the war ended, the 2nd Marine Division went up there on occupation. And they found that that thing was nothing but a honeycomb of guns in the side of the mountain, equivalent to what they had in Iwo Jima. The whole tip of that island.
So you probably wouldn't be sitting here.
You're right. Yeah, it would have been not good. Plus, you know the Japanese would have been fanatical on their homeland. Much more so. And they were fanatical enough at times on some of those islands, saying about what they would have done when you set foot on Honshu.
So how?
You didn't, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
Well, you're probably going to ask me anyway. You didn't shed any tears when the atomic bomb was dropped.
No, you know, the only thing about that, though, for many years, my wife and I always had a discussion about the atomic bomb. I always felt, though, about probably 10 or 15 years ago, that it was very inhumane because they had not picked a real military target. They actually killed about 80,000 civilians. All civilians have been killed in Hiroshima or Hiroshima, however you want to pronounce it. And I always thought, war or no war, we should have picked a real military target for the first atom bomb that we were going to drop. Something strictly military. And I just didn't think that that was a military target. But then, 10 to 15 years ago, I kind of changed my mind because I thought, well, reverse the situation. And they had the atomic bomb. They probably would have been over here to drop it in New York City if they had a chance. So I thought, well, war is war, I guess. So I've kind of gone along, kind of changed my mind a little bit to what I did at first. But I still think the United States should have picked up more of a military target. Something like the shipyards at Tokyo, something that would have been strictly a military target. You agree with me? Or haven't you ever thought of it in that term?
Well, it's one of those questions. Yeah, of course. But then again, I'm not in the president's shoes to make that kind of decision.
Yeah, I have never had, I don't know if history ever said why Truman picked out Hiroshima to be the target.
I don't even know if he did. but,
Well, he must have had the final decision.
yeah. Well, they had secondary targets, of course, and I know
Yeah.
Nagasaki, the second one was a secondary target.
Yeah.
Because of the cloud cover and whatnot.
Yeah. But Nagasaki was a military target, though, where they dropped that one.
How did the other men react to it, to the dropping of the atomic bomb?
Well, I never really discussed what I'm saying here about that with other people. Of course, naturally, everybody was glad when war ended, you know.
Right.
Then we sat around for 3 months waiting to decide what they're gonna do with us.
Yeah.
So how long was it before you arrived home after that?
Well, they dropped the bomb, war ended, August 15th?
Yeah, around then.
We sat in Guam until December the 20th,
Wow.
doing nothing. Absolutely nothing.
How'd they keep you occupied there?
Well, they tried to set up a few schools, courses and things, but anything to keep you busy, you know. Of course, the guys with enough points, reserves and everything, they got to go home. But guys like me with time left, I went to northern China in occupation. I didn't get back until August of '46.
What did you do when you got home?
Well, I would leave, and then, like I said, I stayed in. I re-enlisted.
In China, what was China like? What was your job there? I mean, trying to stop
I went to a place
communists?
called Tsingtao, China. In fact, Tony Luciano from Hudson Falls was there. He was in the same, I visited Tony once. I found out, my mother sent me a newspaper clipping or something about, and I remembered reading about him, you know, at Seton Hall and everything, and I knew he was in the Marine Corps. And I found out I was in the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines in Tsingtao, and he was in the 3rd Battalion. And I visited him one time. We were living in a Shantung University. We took over the whole university compound. Then the communists got a little bit, well, they started putting searchlights up in the mountains and shining them down at night. So they sent, I had the 81 Mortar Platoon in the 2nd Battalion, 4th, and they sent us out at the airfield. They had an airfield called Tangkou, about 15 miles outside of Tsingtao. And they finally chased the Marines out of there, I think, in 1948 or 49, and took that place over.
And then
Tsingtao is renamed another city now, under the, I don't know what it's called now. It's not Tsingtao now, it's something else. But we had to disarm all the Japanese had quite an army in that Shantung Peninsula. Some, I don't know, 30, 40,000 or so. Because we had to they had to disarm them. They had the big ceremony at the racetrack, and they all laid down their weapons. And then we had to start shipping them back to, they put about 1,000 of them on an LST and ship them back to Japan. And we had to send guys along to guard them. Took quite a while to, just to get that army out of there. But that was a really, really a downtrodden place under the Japanese, you know, during the war. For people there didn't have very much. In fact, they'd come in at night and rob your garbage can. That's how hungry they were.
So when did you arrive home from China?
August of '46, I came back.
And what did you do then? Did you go back to college? go to college, or did you?
No, I stayed in the Marine Corps and I went to Earl, New Jersey, Naval Ammunition Depot, and I only stayed there about 3 months, and unfortunately, the same thing happened that happened to me aboard that ship deal. Light cruiser Little Rock pulled into Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they had a gunnery sergeant on there, and he got sick, and he reported into that naval hospital they had in Long Island. I can't think of the name of it now. So they had the authority to reach out and grab a guy, the nearest guy. I got orders 3 o'clock in the afternoon to be in Brooklyn Navy Yard 9 o'clock the next morning. So I wound up on a USS Little Rock for 18 months.
What were you doing on that?
I was we had a detachment of 50 Marines. I was the detachment gunnery sergeant. Very interesting job. I liked it. Got to do a lot of interesting things. Made a Mediterranean cruise, which I would have never seen otherwise.
So what did you do after that, after the 18 months on the Little Rock?
I came back and came back to the States on a Little Rock after that Mediterranean cruise. And the first sergeant called me in one day and wanted to know, he says, they put a bulletin out there in desperate need of recruiters in the Marine Corps. Would you be interested? And I said, I don't know. I'd never thought about it. I said, give me a couple of days to think about it. I'll let you know. I thought about it for a couple of days, and I said, you know, that sounds like a pretty good job. I think I'll try it for it. So I put in for recruiter school. I wound up putting 39 months on recruiting in Philadelphia, district headquarters in Philadelphia. In fact, I was on recruiting in Philadelphia when the Korean War broke, in June of '50. You know, a lot of people don't realize that occurred on a Sunday also. June 25th was a Sunday also, same as Pearl Harbor. And I will never forget the next morning when I came to work. You wouldn't believe, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the line of kids that were outside that door to join the Marine Corps. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So what did you do after that, after recruiting?
It was automatic. Korean War being going, of course. It was automatic. You got off recruiting, you went to Korea. No questions asked. And naturally, after being away from everything all that time, they send you to Camp Pendleton. You have to go through a 3-month refresher course before you go to Korea.
Did you see combat there for you?
I did and I didn't. I was fortunate. The major that I worked for, his father was a retired admiral, and I left recruiting in December '51. I say September, October. He called me in the office one day and he said, did you ever think about taking a commission in the Marine Corps? And I said, no, I never thought about it. He said, well, the Marine Corps has got a program out. Of course, they need officers fast, so the quickest way to get them in an emergency, in a build-up like the Korean War, is to commission NCOs, gunnery sergeants, and master sergeants. And I had made master sergeant in June of '51 after the Korean War started. So what they did in 50, 51, and 52, they commissioned 500 master sergeant, gunnery sergeants, 3 different times, so that 1,500 they had commissioned. I made it in '52, the last time they did it. And like I said, I thought it over a couple of days, and I went back and told him, maybe, he said, well, if you're gonna stay in, why not get all you can out of it, you know? It's a chance, so. So I went to Korea, and I was there about a month when my commission came through. When I first went to Korea, seeing I had mortar experience, the Marine Corps had taken 4.2 mortars. Previous to that, they had never had anything larger than an 81 mortar. So they had a job called Fire Direction Center Chief, which is a master sergeant. And you direct 4.2 mortars are fired like artillery out of a fire direction center, different than the other ones. So I had that job in the 1st Marines, and when my commission went through, they wouldn't leave me in the same outfit. They wanted to transfer to another, so I left there and I went to 5th Marines, back to my old 5th Marines again. And my old company commander in the Raiders was the executive 5th Marines. And Lou Walt, who'd been also in the Raiders, and everybody heard of Lou Walt, commanded all the Marines in Vietnam, retired a 4-star general. So I've always figured that they looked over that list and saw my name on there. I don't know for sure. I never got to talk to Lou Walt all the time I was there. I called my old company commander a few times on the phone, and we'd talk back and forth. But I never come out and ask him, you know. I never got to see him because I'm up there and they're back, you know. I never saw either one of them while I was there. Which leads me to getting a little bit ahead. That's why I left the Marine Corps to win the Army. In 1957, of course, I realized that, I'm 36 years old. They don't want 36-year-old lieutenants. When you're 36 years old in the Marine Corps, you're going to be either you're a major or lieutenant colonel by then. So I understood the situation, that I was going to revert back to master sergeant. Well, I found out about this program, but you're able to win the Army and keep my commission and my seniority and everything. I was stationed, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was stationed in what they call Fleet Marine Force Atlantic. It's in Norfolk, Virginia. You have a 3-star general and a 2-star general. In fact, General Peter Pacis, now the chairman, Joint Chief of Staff, had that job back in the late 90s. I went to a party one night out in Little Creek, Virginia, and I met a guy that I'd served with in World War II, and he'd been commissioned the same time I did. And he was telling me that, he says, I'm going in the Army. I said, what do you mean you're going in the Army? Because we'd already gotten a letter saying on the 30th of June, the end of the fiscal year, we were going to get reverted back to Master Sergeant. So he said, yeah, I've already got the paperwork and I've already been accepted. He says, you interested? I'll tell you who to, I'll tell you who to contact in the Pentagon, and that's it. I said, well, I'm not really interested, but who knows what will happen. Maybe give me his name, address, phone number, and everything, and if I decide to do it, at least I'll have it. The last job I had in the Marine Corps, I was top secret control officer for this Corps headquarters. Well, in the Marine Corps, and I think it's probably the same way today, you can't destroy top secret documents. It all has to be done at headquarters of the Marine Corps. Secret and below, you take over to a burn pit in Norfolk and you dump them in there and record it, and you can do that. But top secret, every 6 months you have to take an armed guard, you put them in a vehicle, and you take them up to headquarters of the Marine Corps. They do the accountability and everything. I had already gotten a letter saying I was going to revert back in June of '57. the 30th of June 57, I was going to revert back to Master Sergeant. In March, I had to make a trip up to headquarters Marine Corps to take these documents up there. So I said, well, while I'm up there, I may as well stop in the enlisted details section and find out where I might, I mean, I had a couple kids in school, and just find out where I might be transferred after I became a Master Sergeant. So I walked in there and posed this question to this captain that was sitting behind the desk. Well, he got all bent out of shape. He says, yeah, he says, all you guys are all running in there now. You all want to run the gravy train now. Now that you've been officers and you're going to, you know. I said, oh, wait a minute. I'm not looking for any big favors. I just want one simple answer, where I might be transferred. Well, he's still carrying on. I was staying overnight and going back to Norfolk the next day. I went back to the hotel, and I got thinking about that conversation. You know, I said, I had 16 years, going on 17 years in the Marine Corps, and I would never retire any higher than enlisted man because I didn't have 10 years commissioned service. And I said, you know, I'm going to run into guys just like him, and I'm going to listen to that the rest of the time I'm in. I said, you know, that Army sounds like a pretty good deal to me. The next morning, I had that kid drive me down to the Pentagon. Fortunately, like, this guy had given me all the directions exactly where to find him. Because if you don't know what door to go in that Pentagon, forget it. There's literally thousands of entrances to that place. It's unbelievable. I had never been in there before, and I never went in there since, and I wouldn't want to. But anyway, by having the exact door number and everything, I was able to walk in there and bingo, I found this colonel's name was Stevens, I'll never forget it. He said, well, here, fill out a bunch of papers. And he says, you will be hearing from us probably within a few days. He says, it tops a week. This was on a Wednesday. Friday morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm drinking my coffee, getting ready to go to work, and the phone rings. And it's this colonel from the Pentagon saying, yeah, you're in. You're all set. We're going to take it. I'll send you this packet of papers. He says, make them out just as soon as you can and send them back to me. And he says, I'll give you all the instructions on what to do. So I did, and he had to do it before the 30th of June because he had to do it while you were still commissioned in the Marine Corps. Couldn't do it. So what they do is they give you a date. You resign your commission one day from the Marine Corps, and you get sworn in the Army the next day. So he sent me all these papers, and I resigned my commission the 16th of June, 57, and I got sworn in the same day, effective the next day. You can't be in the two the same day, so they had to make it, and you don't want any break in service. So they made it out effective the next day. And they gave you your choice. I could either get sworn in the Marine Corps, or I could go over to Fort Monroe, Virginia, which is across the bay, and have the Army swear me in. But I wanted the Marine Corps to swear me in because the colonel that I dealt with down there was the only guy in all my years of service that ever gave me a bad time and I couldn't get along with it. And I found out later, it took me a couple of years later, I found out through a buddy of mine that was stationed down in Norfolk there with me, why. He and Edson had tangled one time in a job out in Hawaii just before the end of World War II, when Edson was, after he made general, he headed services supply for Howland Mad Smith in Pearl Harbor. And I guess this colonel was a major someplace, and Edson went there about some inspection and then found something that he didn't like about this guy. And boy, when he looked at my records and saw that I was in the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, forget it. Whatever I did with that guy, well, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So I said to myself, and he couldn't wait to see, he got so mad when he found out that I was going in the Army. I found this out from the adjutant, because the adjutant was a very good friend of mine. He was an ex-enlisted man, had been commissioned the same time I was. And we were good friends, and he told me that colonel got so mad when he found out that I was going to make out by going in the Army. So I said, I'm going to have him swear me in right here. I want to get him ticked off a little bit more. So, in fact, this Dave Bornhauser was the guy's name, the adjutant. He's the one who swore me in. I went in the Army.
So before you went to the Army, did you say you had kids?
I had kids.
Before you went, yeah.
Yeah, I had two.
Before you got involved with the Army, did you have them, or was
Yeah,
that
I had
after?
two. Yeah, I had a son and a daughter. Yeah.
So how long were you with the Army before you came back?
I only had to put 4 years and 9 months in. The deal was, when we went in, they would give us exactly enough time to complete the 10 years commissioned service, right to the day, and that was it. So I knew when I went in, and I went in the Army, as I said, on the 17th of June, 57, I knew that on 31 March of 62, I was going to retire from the Army. Right on that day. Because that gave me to the nearest month. You got to retire the last day of the month. So that gave me my 10 years commissioned service with a few days extra.
What year was that?
March 31st, 62.
That was my first birthday.
Really?
I was 1 year old on that day.
Yeah, I retired from Camp Drum. It was another captain, and I was in Fort Richardson, Alaska for 2.5 years, my last tour. In fact, I only served in 3 places in the Army in 4 years and 9 months. Served in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, for about, from June 57 to September 58. September 58, I went to Alaska. May 61, and I only had 10 months left to do. So I only served in 3 places.
Sounds like a good deal.
It did. It worked out great. Worked out. I have a lot of things to thank the Army for. I really didn't want to. I would have preferred staying in the Marine Corps. But financially, there's no comparison. So I mean, at that point in your life, you're thinking of, you know,
It's an offer you couldn't refuse.
a lot of difference retiring as a captain versus a master sergeant.
Laura, do you have any more questions?
So did you, after you retired from the Army, what did you do from there?
As I was driving back and forth to Camp Drum on weekends, I noticed that new Sears store being constructed up in the old Queensbury Plaza all that winter. And I said, well, that looks like a pretty good, and that store was going to open in June. So I applied for a job there. I was very fortunate. I got hired as a division manager because of the openings they had, going from a real small store to a large store. So I got a good deal out of it. I got hired as a division manager right off the street. So I worked there for another 21 years.
So how do you, in what ways did you think that your war experience influenced your life?
Well, I think the service actually got me that division manager's job in, you know, when they interviewed me, I can tell right away, that's why they hired me as a division manager, because I had that background of all that service in the Marine Corps and the Army. So it helped me there.
Okay. Do you have anything else you would like to add that we haven't talked about, or?
And I'll say another thing, I thank God that I stayed in the service now when it comes to health care, because I have Medicare and I have TRICARE for Life, which is a military insurance that covers the remaining 20% that Medicare doesn't cover. And you get free prescription drugs. The only thing you have to pay for is $3 per prescription to handle the shipping and handling. And I've had those 2 angioplasties, each one of them came to about $40,000. So just at 20% of that, if I didn't have that TRICARE for Life, you're talking $8,000 right there, twice. And prescription drugs, I'm on about 8 and my wife is on about 10. I figured it out one time, and it's got to be between $2,000 and $2,500 a month just for drugs. So I'll tell you, for a young guy today, there's a lot of things worse than going into service. Because they have a lot of good benefits.
Did you ever go back and visit where you were during the war?
I go down to Quantico every year to a reunion of our Raiders. We're going to have one more, and that's going to be it.
What about over in the Pacific on the islands?
No, I never made any of those trips. I'd like to, but it's a wee bit expensive.
And far away.
Yeah, we've had, well, I know one guy lived down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He went this summer again. He's been over there. He's visited Guadalcanal 3 or 4 times. Jim Smith, our Secretary Treasurer of the Raider Association, that handles all our reunions and everything, he's been over there twice. Some of the guys have, but you're talking a lot of money to make a trip there. But you got to go to Australia, then you got to figure out how to get back there.
Very pretty, I hear.
Well, there's not a lot of airlines that fly up there, which you just about have to charter an airline to go into Guadalcanal. I don't think they have any regular airline service.
Okay, I guess we're finished.
I'd kind of like to. I've always had the idea. Yes, I'd like to. I'd like to be able to walk up on the top of Bloody Ridge today and look at that monument that's up there. Yeah. I would like to. And the one other thing that I'd like to go there, and I can't, in my wildest imagination, the capital of Guadalcanal is a place called Honoria, Honaria, I think is the capital of Solomon Islands. And it has to be strange because it's a city of 30,000, and it's built right on the area each side of the Post-Guadalcanal River. And the Post-Guadalcanal River area, that whole area was a rainforest. You couldn't even see overhead. I can't imagine a city of 30,000 there. I just can't visualize it. How they could physically build a city in that jungle like that. And every time I hear one of these guys come back that visited there, I always think, you know, what does it look like?
That's neat.
Okay.
All right, Lori, you
That
ready?
it?
Yep. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or no?
No, that's enough, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Jerry, for coming in.
Sure.
You're welcome.